welcome to another episode of Super Fast Corner. I'm your host, Kevin Mueller, and today we're going to be talking about how to build and maintain your dual pro ball bearing differential from MC3WLS. So let's take a closer look at the setup that I got over here. So one thing that we got here is a ball bearing diff stand. We actually designed this, and we're going to be allowing anybody the STL file so that they can print it themselves. And also got this amazing little tool here that I'll show you how you can use it to build the diff as well. So when we start building the diff, a couple of things are important. First, the adjustment nut down here. You want to make sure that's seated properly on the shaft so that it's not wiggling left or right. You can do that by putting on the shaft and then spinning it around and around to make sure that it's spinning true onto the shaft. This O-ring, I know yours will be black, this is a prototype one, but the O-ring is important to keep it lubricated. So after you clean it, you might want to put a little bit of oil on it, but then rub away any excess using a paper towel. It's important for this thing to be lubricated because it acts like a little spring to put the pressure against the two pressure plates to give you good differential action. So let's go into building the diff. Obviously the first thing you're going to do is put on the back hub. Now if you're getting your diff brand new out of the box, then you're going to want it to sand these pressure plates. So you use 2000 grit sandpaper and you just sand them nice and smooth. So it's best if you lie it down on a surface like this and then just simply go around in circles. And then you can also flip it over and do the other side. This takes off any little edges and gets out any little imperfections and will make the disc as smooth as possible. Okay, so once you have that seated on, now it's a D-cut O-ring. So when you put it on there, it might be a little bit loose, but it actually can't move during operation because of that D-cut. So it should just sit there fine. Some guys might want to glue this on, but realistically, you shouldn't need to do that. So a little tip here. We made the spur gear here in red on purpose. One of the main reasons is that you can see any dirt on it. So a black one, you can't really tell those little discarded pieces of rubber, how dirty they are. So we don't want any dirt in these holes. So I usually take some pliers just like this and I wrap some paper towel around them and I actually go in and out of each hole after I've soaked my spur gear in rubbing alcohol. So I use isopropyl alcohol or 99% alcohol to clean all my diff parts. Another little tip is that when you first get this from us, the manufacturers of the ball bearing have oiled the ball bearing, and that oil can get all over the diff. So you might want to also clean the ball bearing before you operate it for the first time by just, once again, dunking it in some isopropyl alcohol. Once again, when you sit this on there, it should be nice and smooth. You should be able to spin it a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be some friction still because it's touching the friction plate. So now you need to put in the balls. Obviously, once again, having some needle nose pliers like this is a real big help. Obviously, when they first come, they're going to be nice and smooth and very shiny, just like these balls are. But over time, you might notice that they start to get dull. And when the balls start to get dull, that means that some of the rubber from the racetrack has actually been kind of pressed onto the ball. So it's now stuck onto the ball. And even if you use like isopropyl alcohol, it's not going to be able to get cleaned off of the balls. So then once again, what I do is take my 2000 grit sandpaper and I take a second one and I just rub the balls around on both sides. So I have two pieces of 2000 grit sandpaper, and that will take off any kind of rubber that's remaining on the balls here. And I think I'm one short, which is, of course, no, I'm two short. There's the back of the stand. Okay. Yeah, we took it apart, got a little bit crazy here. Let me. The back of the stand inside. Oh, I see. Yeah, thank you. Still missing one more. Of course, Well, we don't know where that ball is right now. This is okay. Perfect demonstrate. Oh, it's right here. See? Black on black. Hard to see. Got it. So we got all the balls in there. That's good. Once again, your second pressure plate, you want to sand it. It's nice and smooth on either side before you put it in. So I usually just put it on like that first. If we're using the diff stand, it makes it easy. So here comes another important part. Obviously, you have the radial bearing that goes in the back of the hub. So this is the back of the hub. Here's your radial bearing. Okay, this one is actually, you can just, it's pressure fit, but you can just easily, usually most of the time, push it in by hand. Of course, this one's giving me some trouble, so I'm just going to use my little tool here to kind of set it nice and straight and push it in. Okay, you want to make sure it's nice and seated nice and flat in there. When you install the thrust bearing, so this is a very important part, there are two races here. They look like washers with little grooves in them. They're actually different sizes. So this one here is larger in diameter on the outside compared to this one here, which has a smaller outer diameter. It's really important that you put the one with the larger diameter inside the hub first. So the one with the larger diameter must go inside the hub. And it is a little bit difficult at first to push these in there. So I am using this little tool. Once again, we made this little tool. It's a 3D printed tool that you'll be able to download and print for yourself that you can obviously now use to push the race into the outer hub. Okay, so once again, when you do this, I obviously put it onto a flat surface at first, but you can, for the purposes of today, I'll just put it like that. So right now, obviously, it's not seated correctly. So if you can see this here, it's kind of on an angle. Hard to tell. Let me show you this way. All right. So we don't have it seated properly. So once again, I'm going to give it a nice good push. It pushes all the way in. Oh, it popped out with me. Okay. It's okay. Sometimes they pop out again when you push them in. So it's good to make sure it's seated nicely so you can go all the way around the race just like this. Okay. Once you have that in, then it's time to put the diff in. So one little thing that you can know is that there's 5 pieces to this, to the star here. And the one that's on the down from these 2 pieces here is where the D cut is. So then it should be easily for you to find out how to put that on. So you just simply find that with the D clip, and then I usually spin it around just to make sure, push it down, come at low ground level here to make sure everything's seated nice and flat. And then sometimes, once again, this race pops up, so I'm going to push it back in. Okay, so I'm not sure if you saw that, but now I have it nice and seated properly. So I got my last 2 things here. I just need the last 2 parts of my thrust bearing. The smaller race, once again, is on the outside of the diff. And then last but not least, your adjustment nut. Okay, and one other tip is that when you're building this first new is that you can actually smooth out the back of the adjustment nut. So once again, taking your 2000 grit sandpaper, just sanding it a little bit and then putting it on here. And you can just use pliers to twist this on, but once again, we have this special tool here that you can use to simply screw it on. Okay, and that's it. And once you have that all done, it should be super smooth and ready to go. One big tip is that this pressure adjustment nut must be seated correctly onto the thread of the shaft. And as you notice here, I've already put some Teflon tape onto the shaft, and this allows the pressure adjustment nut to sit really firmly onto the shaft. And one thing that we want to do, or one thing that is required, is that when you build this diff is that you make sure that the adjustment nut here is seated so that it runs true on the diff. By true, I mean it's not wobbling. So if you look at the O-ring would be wobbling in this case, but as you can see, the pressure adjustment nut is turning true. So we want everything to be nice and smooth here on the diff, and in order to get a smooth diff, you need to have this pressure adjustment nut seated correctly. So make sure that whenever you're building the diff, or that when you're rebuilding the diff, that this nut is seated correctly on the thread. So last but not least, when you are installing your tire and rim onto the ball bearing differential, you want to make sure that you don't over tighten the nut that holds the wheel onto the ball bearing on obviously this side here, the drive side. So if you do over tighten it, what's going to happen is you're going to put pressure on both sides of the thrust bearing. So you're going to put pressure in this direction, and then the pressure nut's going to be putting pressure in that direction, and it's going to overload the thrust bearing, and you're going to get some real gritty feeling and probably some inconsistent differential action. So make sure that when you tighten this nut, that it is secure but not over tight. If you're going to run a +3 offset, which is what I have here, you actually only need to run or use a +1 rim. So this is a +1 rim, but I'm getting a +3 offset if we were to compare it to any other differential on the market. And the hub on the opposite side is also already +2. So when you put it on, you still only need a +1 rim on this side of the differential, because this hub is already made +2 offset. So obviously this hub wouldn't be able to be used on another diff. That's it. I hope you enjoyed watching us. Thanks for coming on Super Fast Corner. Thanks.